Good day to you. What's it like to work on air in the broadcasting profession? What is it really like? Well, it depends on your particular occupation. And that's what we're talking about in today's class, however you want to phrase it. We're taking a look at working on the air and we're focusing on specific occupations. But before we get into those occupations, let's make one thing clear. If you're a broadcaster, you have one primary job, and that is to get it done. It's an industry, an occupation, a career where there are no excuses. When you're sick, you still find a way to go to work. Saturdays, there needs to be coverage of a sporting event. You gotta be there. Broadcasters get it done, and they get it done on time. They don't show up late. They don't come in, and for some reason something goes wrong, and they don't get it done. I have to emphasize that. It makes the job very, very imposing on a person's life, but it also makes it absolutely thrilling for the right kind of person. Now let's move on to what the three goals are of announcing before we get into the occupation. And this is really nothing different than you've been studying for all of your communication career here at ESU, if that's what you're studying, because we're really talking about announcers, broadcast announcers, as being good communicators. And always you're thinking of how can I inform the audience? That's one goal. How can I persuade the audience? That's a second goal, like when a meteorologist is trying to get you to wear the right clothing for this unexpected snowstorm that's hitting us in April. Or how do I entertain the audience? The third goal. How do I make them feel amused, make them laugh, give them a thrill, a sense of adventure? So these are three goals that are happening all the time. And finally, before we get into professions, let me mention that you have to keep in mind that in the United States, since the vast majority of broadcasting is a money-making enterprise, that you're always looking at the target audience for advertisers. You're always trying to find a way to make it possible for the advertisers to increase what they're going to spend on your station by virtue of how well you're doing with your target audience. And so this leads many academics like myself to not just describe what happens in broadcasting as selling airtime. It is really all about selling access to an audience. If you're a radio station with a demo of 18 to 35-year-old men and women, that's what you're selling. You're selling that demo to Monster energy drinks, for example. And so you're not selling the time so much as you're selling access for these people to be able to hear an advertisement. And that's why so many occupations in broadcasting are dealing with this idea of a target audience and how you refine it. It's why I have you thoroughly, through your media plans, focus on how you can distinguish your audience from other people that you're not really targeting. Now let's talk about the occupations, the first one of which is broadcasting. And I'm talking specifically about radio announcing. So radio announcing is the first occupation we're going to talk about here. There's so many more radio stations and TV stations, about 10 times the amount of TV stations in the United States. And most of the occupations are disc jockeys, also shortened for DJs. Of course, DJs speaks to people who DJ at clubs as well, so it's not just for radio broadcasting. One of the primary things you have to know is music. You have to know musical artists, and that's not easy. There's so many artists coming out all the time. You can't just rely on popular media to tell you about Billie Eilish. You have to learn about musical artists yourself. You have to constantly be studying them, and especially in the digital age when so many artists can guest on each other's work, you got to find out who the guests are. So you have to be a plethora of knowledge, an encyclopedia of knowledge. Most people who start out studying radio in college don't realize that by the time you hit the profession, you're not able to choose music like you are at a college radio station. And so that's a very important thing that you should enjoy while you're at WESS, is the ability to choose your own music. Once you become a professional, the music is going to be chosen through a computer program. It's very formulaic, very software oriented, very mathematical in some ways, so that no two female voices are not chosen in a row for two songs versus what would be a female voice followed by a male voice. These are one of the parameters that you can program into these software programs, the most popular one of which is Music Selector. And so you don't choose your own music, so enjoy it now, because when you may have some little bits and pieces of your day parts, the time in which you broadcast, where you might be able to work in your own choice, but by and large, it's chosen by the radio station. That's not to say that the radio station is completely rigid. There is the device known as a hot clock. You can look at a photo of that in the book. I hope you do. The hot clock shows you how to format your station by putting pieces of the pie on that hot clock. Maybe that's a mixed metaphor, clock and pie, but trying to get across the visual impression there. And in the one piece of the pie, you're going to be playing a hit from this year. And the second piece of pie that's coming up next, you're going to play a hit that's within 5 years old. And the third piece of the pie, you're coming back to a hit that's from this year. See how you're guiding the selection of music? And then you're going to show your stop sets. Stop sets is a phrase that's used to describe advertisements, and they're called stop sets, that set of advertisements that comes and stops the music. An increasing employment opportunity and decreasing employment opportunity at the same time in radio broadcasting has been voice tracking. Voice tracking is where a company that owns radio stations has realized that you don't need to pay a radio DJ to stand around for 15 minutes while the music is playing and then to say 2 minutes of talk. And so voice tracking is where the broadcaster comes into the studio beforehand. They record all of the lines that they're going to use during their 4-hour radio show. They record them all beforehand and then input them into a computer, and then the computer blends those lines into the content. Now you can imagine it doesn't leave anything for spontaneity. It doesn't leave any room for coming in with breaking news or breaking information. So this is a kind of a stale form of programming, but it is a new occupation. I also want you to know that the radio announcing goes live mostly when it's not using voice tracking when it's live. Radio announcing is live mostly during our quote-unquote drive times. That's the most popular time in which radio is listened to. You've got the morning drive of 6 to 10 a.m. Then you've got the afternoon drive of 4 to 7 p.m. That's when most people are in their cars, and that's when you're going to find live programming as opposed to voice tracking. And actually the whole day is divided into day parts, or parts of the day, and these are the shifts that radio announcers work. You've got the drive, early morning drive, which is 6 to 10, and then you've got the midday, which is 10 to 2, or sometimes 10 to 3. Then you've got afternoon drive, 3 to 7. And you've got early evening, 7. You've got evening, which is 7 to 12. And then you've got the overnight, which is 12 to 6 o'clock in the morning. Those are day parts broken up for shifts, and also when the listeners are changing, right? Late night people tend to be more single, for example. People listening during the day, they tend to be working. Another job for radio announcing has not to do with music. It has to do with talk radio show host or sports radio show, although we're going to highlight that occupation separately. And this kind of talk show host does a lot of talking, a lot of introducing, a lot of providing of information, in some cases entertainment and persuasion as well. But the talk show host has to carry a lot more content that's originally from their mind than a radio disc jockey, because they're having to fill up much more time. We want to mention that all radio announcers have to be mindful of not contributing to what is known as PAOLA. That was an old scandal from the 1950s, but the term still hangs around today. It's basically bribing a disc jockey to air music by an artist, because the idea is that the radio station can break that artist much greater, break it to the artist, to the public, to potential purchasing, listening public, break that artist much better than if that artist is trying to get through on YouTube, trying to get through on their own podcast. And so there was a lot of temptation of music companies to offer things to disc jockeys. We used to have a conference here in New York City called the College Music Journal Convention. It's no longer existing, but it used to invite a lot of college music directors in, and they would actually drive them around New York City in limousines, give them drinks, trying to get the college radio circuit to air broadcasts. You still find those kinds of potential potential bribery that goes on. Main responsibility of radio announcers is you have to keep up with the legal requirements, the legal identification. You have to do that at the top of the hour. All right, so that's going to wrap up radio announcing. Because of my schedule today, I'm going to end this first part of the video, and we'll continue on with the second part in the second video.